Good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for a new session of Cigna's Wellbeing webinar series, Connect for Health. My name is Alison Sharp and I look after corporate client management for Cigna in the Middle East. In the wake of COVID-19, as we adapt to the new normal, Cigna understands the importance of prioritising your health and wellbeing. As your health and wellness partner, we are taking proactive steps to implement strategies to help you cope with the current circumstances. Through our Connect for Health webinar series, we continue to work with health and wellness experts to provide you with a practical guide to implement positive changes in your daily life. We have all learned a lot during these past sessions and will continue to learn and adapt as we together wrestle with this pandemic and the impact it has on our lives. By focusing on effective strategies and actions, we at Cigna are reaffirming our commitment to improve your health, well-being and peace of mind in an unprecedented situation with uncommon challenges. One of the key aspects of well-being is your eating habits, and what you eat doesn't only affect your physical health, but how you feel overall. Given this relationship, it's important to understand and to identify your diet and the ways it may be affecting you. Today's session is entitled Identifying Hidden Sources of Sugars and Other Toxins. It explores how choosing cooking method plays an important role in the inflammation and disease. In addition, we will investigate additives, their impact on our health, and ways to avoid ingesting toxins through our diet. Through this live session, we hope you'll be able to identify hidden sources of sugar and become a food label detective. Without any further delay, I'd like to introduce Victoria Tipper from Victoria Tipper Nutrition and Life Coaching. Over to you, Victoria.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today to speak about sugar, how to identify hidden sources and some other toxins. So let's get started with the presentation. So today we're going to speak about those hidden sources of sugar. I thought it was a really good time to speak about this because, you know, with what's going on around the world, I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely been eating not as well as I had been doing before the global pandemic. So particularly things like sugar and processed foods, we're at home a little bit more. So it's a good time for us to actually reset and actually look at what are we eating? You know, what are those hidden sources of sugar? Let's look at what we're going to cover today. We're going to look at the impact that sugar has on the body, how important it is to actually read those food labels and become a food label detective, some shocking sugar content in foods, and what are some of the other toxins to look out for on the food labels, and the impact that sugar has on the immune system. You know, it's really important that we're looking after our immune system, so never before has it been more important. Before we start, I would like you to actually have a little think about how much sugar you personally are ingesting on a daily basis. If you, maybe a weekly basis, because obviously on the weekends, often we overindulge a little bit more. So if you were to give yourself a rating from 0, where you think they have no sugar at all, up to 10, where you're eating all the sugar there is in the world, what number would you give yourself? We're going to come back to that a little bit later, but yeah, just think about what number you'd give yourself. So this is a really interesting study, study that, the American Heart Association did. So for the American Heart Association has said, for you to have a healthy heart, for you to be in really good shape, we want to be meeting these simple 7 checklists. So the checklist for a healthy heart, number 1, you want to be eating a healthy diet. So lots of veggies, lots of whole foods, ideally foods that don't have too many labels on them. You want to be a healthy weight. So that's a BMI between sort of like 19 to 25. You want to be doing about 150 minutes of moderate physical activity a week. This is about 30 minutes, 5 days a week. You want to have not been a smoker in the past year, and you want your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your blood sugar to all be within the healthy limit. So they did a study looking at almost 18,000 people, aged 45 plus, so it did go up to people who were sort of in their 90s. I want you to think now, out of all of those people, how many people do you think met the simple 7 requirements? So maybe just think of a number in your head, whether that's a percentage, whether it's a number. We're talking about almost 18,000 people. So got that number? Shockingly, it was 2 people. This is something that we really need to worry about. So many of us aren't meeting that simple 7 checklist. And one of the reasons we are not meeting it is because of this extra body fat that a lot of us are carrying, or extra visceral fat. So when I say body fat, that's the sort of the subcutaneous fat, the fat that we can pinch. And that's really quite pro-inflammatory. Like, fat cells produce inflammatory markers. But then we have the visceral fat. This is the fat that's more dangerous. So this is the fat that surrounds the organs. We can't pinch it, we can't see it, but if we have high levels of it, it's going to be increasing a lot more of those pro-inflammatory markers, things like interleukin-6. And what that means is that it increases the risk of chronic disease, things like heart disease, things like cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and some forms of cancer as well. So we really, for health, want to be making sure we have low levels of this visceral fat. So you may have actually checked your visceral fat levels before. You can do things like body composition analysis to check that. But if not, a good way of sort of seeing is, if your midriff is getting quite big, then it's an indication that maybe you're increasing that visceral fat. So what are the main drivers of that visceral fat storage and that inflammation and weight gain? You may have guessed, that's the reason why we're talking about sugar today. But it's sugar, and it's also simple carbs, so refined carbohydrates, because essentially they're just broken down into units of sugar. All carbs, by the way, are broken down into units of sugar, but some make your blood sugar levels go up more than others. So if we look at the simple carbohydrates, we're thinking about white breads, the refined ones, white breads, white rice, white pasta, cakes, cookies, cereals, there's breakfast cereals, fizzy drinks. Those are going to have a really high impact on your blood sugar levels. This then means that we produce a lot of insulin, and insulin is a fat storage hormone. It tells your body to store fat. So if we're in terms of better carbs, you're going to be looking at those complex carbohydrates. So, your vegetables, fruits, those whole grains, things like oats, lentil pastas, for example, those sorts of things are going to be much better options in terms of your carbohydrate choices. But really, we want to be reducing those simple carbohydrates. I've mentioned that they drive chronic disease. Also, certain types of cancer, like breast cancer and colon cancer, has been associated with increased sugar intake and refined carbohydrates. And they've even found that on some tumors, they have an insulin receptor. So this means that essentially some of those tumors are able to feed off sugar. So we really want to be staying away from that sugar entirely. It just increases inflammation, and inflammation is the driver of chronic disease. When we eat sugar, sugar is made up of glucose and fructose, if we think about table sugar. And so obviously glucose has an impact, and anyone who is suffering with conditions like diabetes, they know that they need to be taking insulin to help with that. But there's also the fact that we've got fructose. So you've got 50% glucose and 50% fructose in table sugar. But then we have things like high fructose corn syrup, where we have a higher level of that fructose. And fructose is bad. We really don't want to be consuming too much fructose. In a similar way, but for some different reasons as well, compared to glucose. So fructose actually doesn't get removed by insulin. Instead, it gets processed by the liver. So if we're having too much of it, then it can actually cause a fatty liver to occur. And I've seen that in younger and younger clients. So now children who are actually presenting with a fatty liver because they're drinking lots of these, fizzy drinks or fruit juices. So they're really, really high in fructose. What else? Another thing that can happen is that fructose can actually combine with things like protein or fat, and it creates what we call advanced glycation end products. We don't want to have these in our body. They cause our bodies and our cells to age, and they damage our mitochondria. Your mitochondria are the batteries of your cells. So we really don't want that to be happening at all. You know, this is really the secret to sort of staying young and being really, really healthy. So they're going to cause that oxidative damage. Another thing that fructose does as well is it actually, when we eat too much fructose, we're not able to tell our body, our brain doesn't recognize that we've eaten food. So it actually doesn't tell the body, tell the brain that we've had that food. So we end up over consuming calories. So it increases our appetite, essentially. So you might have noticed this in the past because we have high fructose in things like fizzy drinks, cereals, you know, candies, sweets and ice cream. You might have noticed when you eat those sorts of foods that you actually crave sweeter foods. And it's because of this high level of fructose. So we really want to be avoiding sugar, table sugar, and high fructose corn syrup. And unfortunately, processed foods have so much of like normal sugar and high fructose corn syrup in it. So talking about processed foods, we've got added sugar hiding in about 74% of packaged foods. So I actually would ask you once we finish the talk today, you know, maybe if you're at home, which many of us are, have a look in your cupboards, pick out some of the foods and have a look at the labels and see, you know, how much sugar is actually hidden. So food marketeers have become really clever because they know that we know that sugar is bad. So they've actually found, you know, there's up to 63 different names for sugar. Here I've listed 50 different names. I'm not going to go through them individually, but essentially anything that has an O's on the end of it, sucrose, glucose, you know, fructose, dextrose, that's another name for sugar. Anything that's called a concentrate, that's another name for sugar. Anything that's called a syrup, it's another name for sugar. So really become that label detective. Look at the ingredients list. If you see something that looks like it's sugar in the first 5 ingredients, then that tells you that that's a high sugar product and you don't want to be consuming that on a regular basis. I'm not saying you can never have those things, but that should be something that you're having, you know, as a treat every once in a while. It shouldn't be something that you're having on a regular basis. And this is really for us to start thinking about, what are we doing on a daily basis? And of course, you know, thinking about if you're adding any sugar into your foods as well. But yeah, become a label detective. I'm going to show you the next 3 slides. This might be a good time for you to take a screenshot because these are really interesting slides in terms of the sugar content in food. You know, I mentioned before, we're going to look at the shocking sugar content of certain foods. These are tables that were created by a doctor in the UK, and he works as a diabetes doctor. So he's actually looked at what are the different sources of foods that, you know, make up our entire sugar burden. Because it's not just, you know, your Coca-Colas or your fizzy drinks and your cakes and your sweets and your cereals that are giving us that sugar. Those definitely do. Those are the foods with added sugars. But we've also got sugar, albeit naturally, but occurring in other foods. So, for example, naturally occurring sugars. Things like fruit, you know, things like honey and natural sweetener, skimmed milk. So when we're reducing the fat in milk, we're increasing the sugar. You know, dried fruits as well can be a very big source of sugar. And fruit juices definitely can be very, very high in sugar. And then, of course, we've got the foods with added sugar, which we know we need to avoid. And then the foods that are digested down into sugars. So this is like your, you know, when we think of the grains, the breads, the rice, the pastas, and the starchy vegetables as well. So your body doesn't differentiate between sugar from added sugar versus sugar from, you know, fruit or from the grains. The main difference being when we're getting that sugar from, say, fruit or vegetables or from grains, it actually comes with other things like fiber and with water and other nutrients. So of course, this is going to be the much better option. But just to be aware, you know, I've had some clients that have been, you know, having sort of 5 or 6 portions of fruit a day, and you sort of go, that's quite a lot of sugar. So let's look into another one of Dr. David Unwin's infographics. I really like this because it actually explains different portions of food and how many teaspoons of sugar your blood sugar levels will go up. So this is looking at the glycemic response. It's not the carbohydrate content of food, but the glycemic response. So for example, if you're eating 150 grams of basmati rice, which is about 3/4 of a cup, your blood sugar levels are likely to go up by 10.1 teaspoons of sugar. And for potatoes, that's 150 grams of potatoes, about 9.1. So we can look down the list, like things like French fries, spaghetti. It's all of these foods are actually contributing to our sugar burden. I'm not saying that I'm not saying we have to avoid these foods necessarily, but if you are somebody who has an issue with cholesterol, with your blood sugar levels, if you're carrying a bit of extra weight and you're wanting to lose some of that visceral fat or some body fat, if you know that genetically, it might be in your family, perhaps your parents or aunts or uncles or, brothers and sisters might be experiencing issues with, say, diabetes or cholesterol. This is a good time for you to actually think about, okay, that might be something that's in my genes. What can I do now to help prevent that from happening in the future? And this is where we just want to reduce that overall sugar burden. So, of course, then looking at, vegetables and fruits as well, they are a source of sugar, but some are going to be better than others. We'll have a look at that, in the next slide. What I want to highlight here as well is if we look lower down, and this is another, good one to take a screenshot of. If we look further down the list, we can see that things like your non-starchy vegetables, your broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, mushrooms, onions, any of the greens. And these are really amazingly healthy vegetables in terms of their micronutrients and fiber, but they have a very minimal impact on blood sugar levels. So these are the things that we should be really filling up on and eating a lot of. And of course, things like eggs, protein sources as well, nuts and seeds, fish, chicken, those sorts of things have very minimal impact on your blood sugar levels. I wanted to show you this one as well, just to give you an idea, because often we think about fruits and vegetables and we clump them together, but actually in terms of the glycemic response, it can be quite different from, vegetable to vegetable and fruit to fruit. So, we've mentioned before that having, a portion of potatoes actually has quite, makes your blood sugar levels go up by, around 9 teaspoons of sugar. But also things like sweet corn, it tastes delicious, but it really makes your blood sugar levels go up quite high. And things like frozen peas, whereas those non-starchy vegetables are going to be a great choice. Dried fruits, I've mentioned raisins can be quite high, but a portion of raisins is actually going to make your blood sugar, and that's about half a cup, is going to make your blood sugar levels go up, by over 10 teaspoons of sugar, which is a lot. And even for any of you with children, we tend to give our children quite a lot of raisins as snacks, and that's fine because they're going to be using up their energy levels. But just to look at their sugar burden, if they're having fruit juices and raisins and lots of fruit, that's a lot of sugar that they're having in their diet. So try and balancing that out with perhaps things like vegetable sticks and hummus, that sort of thing. But the best choices in terms of fruits are definitely going to be things like your berries, apples, and pears as well. So any form of berries, also really, really high in those phytonutrients and fiber, of course. We've looked at, foods with natural sugar, foods that are broken down into sugar. Now I want to just touch upon some foods that have a lot of hidden sugar. So we can see, and I always like to start off with looking at yogurt. And by the way, when it comes to hidden sugar, some studies have shown that many people will eat half of their, they'll eat their body weight in added sugar every year. And half of that is thought to come from liquid sugar. So things like your fizzy drinks, your energy drinks, things like sort of if you're going for, chai, sort of like lattes, like those sorts of drinks, any of those flavored coffee drinks that you can get from the coffee houses, really, really high in sugar. So we want to be not drinking our sugar. So let's go back and have a look at the, yogurts. Low-fat yogurts, low-fat flavored yogurts can be a really high source of sugar. And I would actually suggest the next time you go into the supermarket, you pick up, a Greek yogurt, a natural Greek yogurt, unflavored, versus, a flavored low-fat yogurt, and have a look at the sugar content. It's going to be very, very different. When we're removing that fat, we actually start to increase the sugar, and particularly when it's flavored. So we've got, about 5 teaspoons and 150 grams of a flavored, zero fat yogurt. In fact, I've seen that in some zero fat strawberry flavored yogurts, you've got about the same amount of sugar as we find in strawberry ice cream. And a lot of people are having this in the morning as their breakfast, thinking they're starting their day quite well. And we don't want to be having too much sugar, particularly when we first wake up, because it really, when your blood sugar levels go up really high, really quickly, it leads to sugar crashes. We'll talk about that in a moment further. But yeah, marinara sauces, every jar has about 6 teaspoons of sugar. So actually, rather than using that, getting like a passata or chopped tomatoes and making your own marinara sauce. Of course, things like Butterkist, any kind of like popcorn is going to be really high in sugar. And cereals. So this is for Frosties. We can imagine that Frosties, it tastes sweet. It's got that sweetener on it. We can imagine it's got lots of sugar. But Dr. David Unwin, he actually found, this was the diabetes doctor, that a bowl of cornflakes with milk has a glycemic response of making your blood sugar levels go up about, I think it was 8.4 teaspoons of sugar. So cereals, again, they're not the best way to start your day. We want to be going for a breakfast that is has more protein and healthy fats and a bit of fiber added to it. And then if we look at any kind of, processed foods, those ready meals, they can be really high in sugar, particularly anything that has sauces like sweet and sour, barbecue, teriyaki, and even things like, ketchup. So those condiments that we're using, the sweet chili sauce, they're really high in sugar. For 1 tablespoon of tomato ketchup, you've got 1 teaspoon of sugar. Of course, things like processed soup. So, 5 teaspoons of sugar in a can of tomato soup. And for Coca-Cola, 9 teaspoons of sugar per can. The scary thing is that you can actually find in orange juices and apple juices, often you find about a similar amount of sugar that you get in Coca-Cola. You're getting other nutrients, but it's just still really high in sugar. So we don't want to be drinking our sugar intake. There's been studies that have shown as well, when it comes to fizzy drinks, things like your Coca-Colas, your Fantas, whatnot, it's shown to reduce lifespan, particularly in women. And it can also increase the risk of conditions, inflammatory conditions like arthritis. And then things like your vitamin water. So just be really wary of what you're consuming. And actually, this is the point. Now we've gone through a few different ways that we have that sugar burden. I want you to now think about the number you thought about earlier on, between 0 and 10, of what your weekly sugar intake is like. I'd like to ask you to, rescore yourself. Would that number change? Does it go up? Maybe it goes down. Now you're actually looking at some of the hidden sources of sugar and even the natural sources of sugar that we're getting into the body on a daily or weekly basis. Often people will ask me, or they'll say to me, but it's okay, I'm not having sugar, I'm having the diet product. And I always like to refer to this study. So this was a 14-year study where they compared normal full sugar soda drinkers to diet soda drinkers. And they found that diet soda drinkers were up to 60% more likely to develop type 2 diabetes than those who drank regular soda. I'm definitely not saying go back to your normal sodas, but I'm saying that they're both as bad as each other, and perhaps the artificial sweeteners perhaps are even worse. So artificial sweeteners, we're talking about things like aspartame, saccharin, sucralose. They confuse the body because they have 0 calories. So number one, we consume it, and then they make you actually want to eat more calories because you didn't get that calorie. So you often find when people are using diet products, they tend to overeat in other ways, and hence, an increase in conditions like type 2 diabetes. They also train us to crave more sweet foods because they're so sweet in taste. So the more sweet things you eat, the more sweet things you want. So just to be aware, there's also studies showing that some of these, artificial sweeteners, they can cause conditions like they have an impact, things like migraines and headaches, increasing body fat. They can increase, cardiovascular disease. It's been shown, diabetes. They can also increase inflammation in the gut. And this is something that we really don't want. An inflamed gut lining causes or leads us to have an inflamed brain. So we don't want that. So be careful. Again, something to look at. If you're buying something that says sugar-free, have a look in the label. What are the ingredients? Is there something that looks like it's an artificial sweetener that's added? Then you want to steer clear of it. What can we use to replace sugar? We often need a little bit of sweetness in our life. So I'm not saying you can never have sugar again, but it's about finding some healthier alternatives. So, for example, better sugar substitutes would be things like, raw honey, coconut sugar, stevia, or things like date or banana puree. So I mentioned before that when we eat foods, our blood sugar levels go up a certain amount, and that can be measured using the glycemic index. So just as a reference, table sugar has a glycemic index of 65, which is considered high. Raw honey is anywhere between 35 and 55. So that could be a good choice. You can't really cook with raw honey, but if you're using it to add a bit of sweetness to something uncooked, that can be really quite good. You only want to go for raw. You don't want to go for the other honey because then that's just pure sugar. You're not getting the other nutrients. Things like coconut sugar have a glycemic index of 35. So you can just use that, whatever measurement. So if you're making a birthday cake for your partner, your child, yourself, whatever. And I know a lot of people during, this quarantine have been experimenting with baking. So banana breads and whatnot. So instead of using that sugar, you can just replace it with coconut sugar. Or you can use things like banana puree or dates. So we're getting a bit of that fiber, getting a few more of those vitamins and minerals that you're not going to find in normal sugar. They can have quite a high glycemic index as well, so just to be warned. And then there's things like stevia. Stevia, personally, I wouldn't use in terms of the taste. It's not for me. It's not for everyone, but some people are fine with it. It has no impact on your blood sugar level. And as long as you're going for the green leaf stevia, then it can be quite healthy. So those are some alternatives. But those are things to just use, sparingly every now and then for a treat. These are definitely not things that I would recommend people are using on a daily basis. We want to move away from having that added sugar. These would all count as added sugars on a daily basis. And then there's spices. So this is my favorite preference. So, using things like vanilla beans or pods, nutmeg, and cinnamon would be my number one go-to. If you go for the Ceylon cinnamon, it's amazing. Cinnamon adds that sweetness, a lovely, lovely taste, but it also has some nutritional properties. It's really good as being an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and it actually lowers the amount of insulin that your body will produce, and so it lowers your blood sugar levels. So it's great. Anyone who has some blood sugar levels, or if there's a family history of it, having a teaspoon of cinnamon a day is going to be great. I add cinnamon into, if I'm making stews, whatever I'm making, I'll add that cinnamon into it. Like even some Greek yogurt in the morning with some cinnamon and nuts and seeds, a great start to the day. So, and I'd like actually to ask you this question for you to think about this now. If you are somebody that is, or are you somebody that craves sugar on a regular basis? I've had a lot of clients where on a daily basis, they will say, but I have to have something sweet after my meal. And so I want you to think about whether this is something that you feel sugar has a hold on you, because it actually has been shown, we can become addicted to sugar, and there's a reason behind it. So what happens is it becomes this perpetual cycle. So first of all, we eat the sugar, we like it, and then we start to crave it. So our blood sugar levels will spike, they go up, and the more refined the carbohydrate, the more added sugar it has in it, the higher those blood sugar levels will go. And then this will actually cause a release or it will light up the dopamine pathway. And dopamine is responsible for the pleasure part in our brain. So interestingly, dopamine is actually something that anyone who is addicted to anything, so whether it's sort of legal substances, whether it's things like gambling, wherever it might be, this is the same pathway that happens. We get that pleasure part of our brain starts to light up, and it makes us want to come back and do more of it. So that's essentially what happens when you're having sugar. It also causes the release of opioids, and in fact, they did a study where they looked at Oreo cookies, and they found that eating Oreo cookies actually lit up the dopamine pathway more than certain illegal drugs. So it's real. There can be that sugar addiction, and it's not necessarily your fault. It's just the effect that it has on the brain. So yeah, we eat the sugar, the blood sugar levels go up. They go up. The higher they go up, the more that those blood sugar levels drop, and they fall very quickly and they go very low. And then because they've gone up so high, we produce a lot of insulin. So it goes into immediate fat storage mode in the body. And when our blood sugar levels have gone really low after being very high, that's when we actually start to crave that sugar again. So it causes us to actually increase the appetite, and we want to have more. The other thing about having a sugar addiction is that the more you have sugar, it lights up that dopamine pathway, but it doesn't light it up as much as it did before. So what happens is it makes you want to crave more and more sugar. I don't know about, you all sort of on the other side listening to this, but I know certainly at the beginning of, sort of quarantine, like 3 months ago or so, I was indulging a bit more. And I definitely felt that the more I indulged, the more I wanted. And then it took me to actually come back away, to come off of eating that sort of like added sugar or having too many sort of, carbs, refined carbs, to actually be able to feel like I didn't need it anymore. So remembering that it is an addiction for some people, you maybe necessarily don't want to just go cold turkey. So if you feel that you have these very strong sugar cravings and you're having sugar on a daily basis, you might want to wean yourself off gradually. So I want you to think about, what can you do now to actually reduce that sugar burden on a daily basis? And then when you get to the point where you feel you're good, that's when, in a perfect world, if we take 30 days, without any sort of like added sugar, it actually helps to reset our taste buds. So you might find, that sugar, things just taste too sweet. You don't go back to wanting that sugar again. So yeah, just do it gradually. We've spoken about sugar. Now I wanted to touch upon some other toxins that we get on food labels. And there's so many, so there's only a few that I have time to talk about now. But one of the things I really want to speak about are these artificial flavorings that we get on labels. We find these artificial flavorings in things like ice cream, crisps and chips, sweets, beverages, and chewing gum, and also some baked goods, even things like oatmeal or some porridge, certain porridges. And what it is, artificial flavors, they give fake food, they make fake food taste real. So they're synthetic. Often they're actually made from things like petroleum, as are artificial colorings as well, by the way, and they're also very bad. And what's happened is there's up to like 100 different types of artificial flavors. And food, on a label, you don't actually have to name the individual flavoring that you're using. You just have to put artificial flavors. And what happened was in October 2018, there were 7 artificial flavorings that were identified as potential carcinogens, so they can cause cancer. And so this has been banned by the FDA in the United States. And what they've said is they've given companies until October this year to actually eliminate those artificial flavors from foods. So when you pick up a label, if it says artificial flavors, remember after this or at some point later on today or over the weekend, get your foods out, packaged food, and look at the labels and see how many have those artificial flavors, because potentially they could contain, 1 or maybe 7 of those, carcinogenic flavorings. So we really want to make sure we're reducing those artificial flavors. They're really not good to have. But even natural flavorings. So have a look again out for natural flavorings. They are almost as bad as artificial flavors. They're just synthetic. So we just don't want to be having any of those in our daily diet, even in our weekly diet. Ideally, we're just cleaning everything up. So I just wanted to show you a slide on what are some of the sources of artificial flavors. I've just chosen to look at, chewing gum here. So again, if you're somebody that chews gum on a regular basis, have a look and see, because not all of them will contain artificial flavors. So have a look and see, but ideally, you're not really, using too much chewing gum. But yeah, we've got those in lots of different types of chewing gum. And also I just wanted to point out, for example, the US version of Quaker Oats has some artificial flavor. So artificial flavorings, they are cheaper than using the fruit itself to add that flavor. And it's just a way of making us really want to have more of that food. So we go back to it and we're buying more of it. So just be really, really careful and read those labels. Also to mention, artificial colorings we want to be avoiding. They've been shown to cause or to have a relation to hyperactivity in children. And there are certain food colorings, like I think it's red number 3 and a caramel coloring, that also has been shown to be a potential carcinogen. So avoiding any artificial colorings and flavorings. Other toxic ingredients, monosodium glutamate, this is a flavor enhancer. This is a thing that makes food taste really good. So again, it's, food manufacturers being quite clever in wanting us to eat more of their food. It gives that umami taste that is very Moorish, so we want to go back to it. And it makes you realize the saying, Pringles, once you pop, you can't stop. There's a reason why, because it contains things like this monosodium glutamate, which just makes us want to go back and eat more of it. So it's kind of confusing our brain, tricking our taste buds into wanting to have more. So monosodium glutamate, for a lot of people, they can actually be quite sensitive. So it excites our neurons in our brain, and that can cause fatigue and can cause things like headaches, migraines, brain fog, and it can damage that mitochondria. So I mentioned before, the mitochondria, they're the batteries to our cell, the things that give us a lot of energy, the things that help to keep us young and healthy. So we don't want to be damaging those. So looking out for anything that has monosodium glutamate in it, but also things that have yeast extract or vegetable protein. It's another way of sort of saying monosodium glutamate. So, and we find those, as you can see the pictures here, a lot of salad dressings and any kind of, crisps and fast food, those sorts of things can be big sources. The other thing for you to be aware of is the country of origin. So and I know we're on the call from all different parts of the world, but I sort of went into my local supermarket this week just to see, and it's quite shocking. So a lot of those artificial colorings and flavorings have been banned in certain parts of Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, and other parts around the world, but not quite yet in the States. So you just want to make sure, the product, having a look at the product of the country of origin and having a look at that label. So if we compare the two, and by the way, I'm definitely not saying go and have the UK Doritos. Ideally, you're not having either. But just as a comparison, we can see, number one, that the product from the States has a lot more ingredients in it, which is a no-go. In terms of an ingredients list, you want to have as few ingredients as possible. Then the other thing is we've got things like those artificial flavors and colors still in the States product, but not in the one from the UK. However, both contain monosodium glutamate and both have got some things that aren't going to be great. So it's just to be aware, because there are different laws in different regions around the world. So looking at that food label. So we've looked at the fact that you want to look at the ingredients list, how important this is, but also to learn how to read nutrition labels. So this could be another one to take a screenshot of, because if you're anything like me, you probably just won't remember this straight off. But Essentially, when you're comparing two different types of foods, you want to make sure you're looking at the per 100 gram rather than the per serving size, because the serving size can change from product to product. So what we want to look at, looking at the per 100 gram, we're looking at the total fat. Ideally, it's less than 10 grams per 100 grams. So I've chosen chocolate biscuits, so it's not that surprising that, you know, there's some red circles in the page here. But if we look at total fat, of course, there's 27 here. So that's more than what we want, because we want that to be under 10. And saturated fat, and this type of saturated fat is going to be terrible for the heart. We want it to be less than 3 grams. Sodium, ideally, you're having under 2,300 a day, but in a product, per 100 gram, a good score would be under 120, but at least we want it under 400. So we can see the sodium in this, it's higher than what we want, but it's not incredibly high. Sugar, we want it, you know, these are chocolate biscuits, so it's not that surprising. Per 100 grams, we want it to be less than 15 grams. And we can see here, there's 45 grams of sugar. So when we're looking at the label for carbohydrates, by the way, the total carbohydrates, we don't need to worry as much about that. It's the sugar content you really want to concentrate on more so. And these could be natural sugars from fruit or milk, or it could be added sugar, like your high fructose corn syrup or your table sugar or whatever, you know, fruit concentrate, whatever it might be. So we ideally want it to be less than 15, but a good one would be, or a good score to be under 5 grams of sugar. It's going to be a really low sugar count. And then finally, you want to be looking at how much fiber you've got in that product. You know, we don't have any fiber in these chocolate biscuits, but fiber is the thing that's going to help lower blood sugar levels. And actually, just wanted to add, if you're having a piece of fruit or something that contains sugar, and you know a bit more about those foods that contain sugar, you always want to make sure you're adding fiber and some protein to it, because that will actually lower how much your blood sugar levels go up. So for example, you know, if you're having a couple of dates, add some nuts or seeds into that. And rather than just having some rice, making sure that you have, you know, some fish or some vegetables, because that will actually lower how much your blood sugar levels go up. This is really the last slide, and we're looking at how, you know, we've spoken about how sugar is bad for overall health, but just the current times that we're in, we want to be doing whatever we can to support a healthy immune system. And sugar is bad for the immune system. We don't fully understand the relationship sugar has with the immune system, but there is some interesting studies. So for example, we know that there was a study that showed having 75 grams to 100 grams of sugar suppressed the immune system for up to 5 hours. So literally, and this is the equivalent to about, you know, 2 cans of soda or 2 sort of, you know, grande chai lattes from a coffee house. So essentially, you know, drinking those will just kind of switch off almost your immune system for those 4 hours. It completely suppresses it. That's quite a lot of sugar, but the idea is that if you have a can of soda, your immune system is going to be functioning at 50%. So a lot of us are at home at the moment, but I want you to think about, if you are having sweet foods, it's probably not a good idea for you to have, ideally it's not a good idea for you to have those sweet treats anyway, but to have something and then maybe go out and do your shopping in the supermarket, because your immune system will not be at its best. So yeah, think about when you're having your sweet treats. The other thing is that I've mentioned that sugar actually triggers low-grade inflammation. But when we combine sugar and also saturated fat, which is what we get in a lot of processed foods, it triggers the production of these inflammatory markers, things like cytokines, and they can actually pass the blood-brain barrier, and they will affect the immune cells that we have in the brain. And what this does is that it actually affects our moods. So it can cause some inflammation in the brain, and that can cause us to feel a bit low. And so there's been some association between high sugar and conditions like depression. So just in terms of, you know, we're wanting to feel as happy as we can during these times. So to avoid it for that reason. And last but certainly not least, sugar doesn't support a healthy microbiome. So a microbiome refers to the bacteria, the microbes that we have in our body, on our skin, in our blood, and our digestive tract. and particularly the microbes we have in our gut, they play a massive role in supporting a healthy immune system. And they like to feed them, they get strong and they like to feed themselves, and they become more varied when we eat lots and lots of fiber. So things like beans and lentils, vegetables, fruit, nuts and seeds. That's what feeds a healthy microbiome. That's what's going to support the immune system. We have about 70 to 80% of the body's immune system is located in the gut. Whereas sugar, it's going to feed bad bacteria and things like yeast. So yeah, if we're eating too much sugar, we're not leaving enough room to fuel the good guys. So some key takeaways from today's session. We want to be eating real whole foods, and a good way to, a good setup for most plates, particularly if you're somebody who is struggling with any of the conditions we mentioned, is to focus on having clean protein, healthy fat, and good source of fiber. So fiber from the veggies and beans, nuts and seeds, healthy fats, avocados, olive oil, nuts and seeds, clean protein. Again, another way to reduce toxins, moving away from any meats that contain antibiotics or hormones. If foods have a label, make sure you recognize the ingredients and you can pronounce them. This is so important. If you look at that ingredients list, and if you can't pronounce something that's on it, that's going to probably be synthetic, and you don't want to put that in your body. So you should recognize what it is. And we need to be avoiding any packaged food if sugar is listed in the first 3 to 5 ingredients, or if it contains artificial or natural flavors and artificial colors, to stay away from it. And I'd like to say, it's not that you can never have that sugar, but really that it shouldn't be a daily event. So the last thought I'd like to leave you with as well is, what is going to be, after listening to this, what's going to be one action step that you can take to improve the cleanliness of your diet, to reduce those toxins and to reduce that sugar? Thank you so much for listening. So now we're going to go to the Q&A, and I would like to introduce or to bring back my colleague, Alison. Thank you so much.
Hi, Victoria.
Hello, Alison.
Thank you very much for that session. I'm just thinking about what's going to be my kind of action going away from this. Because some of the stuff that you've said has been really surprising. So I think for me, I do cook for myself probably about 70% of the time, but then I do order now and again. So I think I'm going to reduce the ordering, because if you're using fresh ingredients, then you know exactly what's going in. If you're ordering, then I don't know what they're using. So yeah, quite surprised by some of the things that you'd mentioned, particularly the basmati rice. I was shocked by the impact that has.
Yeah, and obviously in this region, a lot of people, we're eating a lot of rice, so it's good to just become more aware. A nice tip as well is, maybe, I'm a big fan of cauliflower rice, where it's literally just cauliflower and you grate it down. And something I say to my clients is, maybe you half your portion of the basmati rice that you're normally having, and you bulk it up, throw in some of that cauliflower rice. So you're still getting your rice, and visually your brain thinks you're still having your same portion of rice, but you're getting a lot of that good fiber and veggies in, so it won't have as much of an impact on blood sugar levels.
Yeah, and what about brown rice? So I get what you're saying about halving it with the cauliflower rice, which is a good idea, but what about brown rice? Because what was it you said, basmati, it was like had the impact of what, 10 spoonfuls of sugar? What?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. And to be honest, brown rice it's not that dissimilar. The idea is as well, it's just reducing portion sizes. So I also say to people, think about, if you were to look at a plate, a good way to plate distribution would be half of your plate as a non-starchy veg, a quarter as your clean protein, and a quarter of a whole grain. So something like maybe a brown rice or quinoa or some sweet potatoes, something like that. Whereas a lot, and then some healthy fat. Whereas a lot of people are having that carb as the main event. And they have kind of like 3/4 of a plate of that, and then they'll add in a little bit of something else. So it's kind of just getting back to reducing those portion sizes. The other thing is, and what I have to mention is that everyone is going to be different in terms of their carb tolerance. So think about your genes. You know, like I mentioned, if you have people in your family that have had issues with cholesterol, you know, with diabetes, then you might be at an increased risk of developing that in the future. So it's more important to look at your carbs. You know, that's me personally. That's what I have to do. I actually did a genetic test and found that I can't process carbohydrates very well. But it's not that I don't eat them. It's just that I choose my timing. So I have my carbs after a workout. That way your body's actually better able to process them. So if you're active, if you're doing lots, then you can eat more carbs.
Okay, we have lots of questions today, so I'm going to go right into them. So Barack has asked a question: what do you think about dark chocolate above 70%? Do you think it's okay to have a square block per day, or should one completely avoid it?
So I'd definitely say that would be, I'm a fan of dark chocolate. I think it's fine if you're sticking to a square and, you know, that above 70%, so the higher, the better, because dark chocolate has got a lot of good, you know, antioxidants in it. So it can be really quite good for our overall health and well-being. So I don't really think there's anything wrong with that. You know, the more bitter it is, kind of the better it is for you. The only thing I will mention, if you're somebody who's quite sensitive to caffeine, there's something in dark chocolate that can affect you as well, and maybe make you not have as good a sleep. But if you're fine with it, I think it's fine to have some dark chocolate. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Someone has asked about kefir. It helps as a natural probiotic, but it contains sugar. What's your thoughts on that?
Great question. Fermented foods, things like kefir, when we have the good bacteria in them, they actually pre-digest a lot of the sugar. So for example, even if you're making your own yogurt, that will it has lactose in it, the milk sugar, but when you fermented it into yogurt, it doesn't really have that. So I think kefir is great. It's fantastic to have. Ideally, you're making your own in a perfect world. It's not always, you know, we have jobs and lives, so it's not always possible. But going for unflavored, that's the main thing. Add your own sweetness if you need to. Like I have coconut milk kefir, you know, most days, and I'll make it into a smoothie, and I'll sort of like add in a bit of like cacao powder and maybe some berries, something like that. So yeah, definitely kefir is a fantastic way to improve that microbiome, and that's going to help improve the immune system during these times.
There was one thing that you did mention, and someone else has asked about it, and I was relieved when I heard it. So just to confirm, you did say that stevia is not detrimental to your health. There's kind of no harm in the green leaf stevia.
Absolutely. So that whole, you know, the old adage that that not all, you know, stevia was created equal, though. So it's again about looking at the ingredients list. But if you're going for, there's two types that are good: the green leaf stevia and the purified stevia. They're fine. The only thing I would say is, just for me personally, the taste, I can't handle it. But otherwise, it's a great thing to use, like as a replacement. The only thing, like I sort of mentioned before, if you find that you are having a lot of sweet cravings, when we're having those sweeteners, it is still training your body to want sweet stuff. But you know, hey, sometimes we need some sweetness in our life. So it's definitely that's going to be a good one to go for. Yeah, the green leaf stevia. Yeah.
Me personally, I don't really have a sweet tooth, but I do need stevia for my coffee. So I was relieved when you said that was okay.
Yeah, you're lucky you don't have a sweet tooth then. Yeah, because I definitely do, but I don't give in to it. I've retrained myself, but yeah.
Jane Morgan has asked, what if you eat a healthy diet and don't eat simple carbs, but you still find you're gaining weight around your midriff?
So when it comes to, this could be a hormonal thing, when it comes to weight gain, even stress. So when we're highly stressed, the body, for some people, could go into fat storage mode. Even looking at things like thyroid. So thyroid, having an underactive thyroid can play a big role in reducing our metabolism. So we're just not burning as many calories as we should be. And even looking at the healthy diet, sometimes if your meals are mainly, you know, non-starchy veg, protein, and healthy fats, and that's a really low glycemic, like sugar burden that you're having there. So then you've got to look at what else could it possibly be. So maybe it's something hormonal. And also then there's also the timing of foods. So doing things like time restricted eating, where you're at minimum, everyone should be having 12 hours where they're not eating anything or drinking anything apart from like water. This includes the time that we're sleeping, thankfully. So, you know, it actually makes it not too difficult. But you might want to experiment with expanding that window of fasting to maybe 14 hours or 16 hours. But yeah, it's not necessarily for everyone. So it's looking at there's a few different things. It's the food you're eating, the timing, and also even your exercise. So I've known people, they were exercising too much, and that was having an impact on their cortisol levels. So that was putting their body into fat storage mode. So we really want to make sure we've got life in balance a bit. And if, you know, all of us have seen an increase in stress over the last 3 months, unless you've been living under a rock, which I don't think any of us have. And so we kind of, you know, really need to look at doing things to relax the body. So things like yoga, meditation, are actually going to help the body to switch off the stress response, and that in turn will help with reducing body fat.
I'm reading the questions at the side, and it seems a lot of people really don't want to give up their
by the way, any questions that come through that don't get answered, I'll definitely answer them after. So yeah, you will definitely all get your answers. Yeah.
One person has asked, can I have your advice on having oil cooked popcorn?
So I think it all depends upon the oil that you're using. And it's good because I don't think I really mentioned the oils in this talk. There's just so many things that can be toxins to the body. So it's trying to find time to speak about them all. But, you know, you want to be avoiding those processed vegetable oils. They're really pro-inflammatory. So things like sunflower oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, canola oil, we don't want to be using those. Actually, a good thing would be maybe using a bit of grass-fed butter, or some organic grass-fed butter, or some ghee, or if you're using a bit of coconut oil, you know, because they actually are a lot more stable, and when we heat them, they don't kind of they don't change in structure. So it really depends on the type of oil that you're using. But I think that's fine to be doing a bit of, if you're doing it at home, brilliant. You know, the popcorn that we're getting out not many of us have been able to go to cinemas, but if you're going to the cinema, you know, number one, the portion sizes are crazy. So we're all over consuming, and just the oils that they're using, you know, even you mentioned about eating, you know, you were getting 30% eating outside. Whenever we're eating from outside, they're using cheap oils and they're reusing them over and over again, and that's going to be really bad for our, you know, inflammation, really bad for our health. So anything you're doing at home, choosing the right oil is going to be fine as a treat. Absolutely, go for the popcorn.
Yeah, we have a question about toxins in meat.
Yep, again, great question. So there's a few different things. So number one, and actually one of the biggest toxins and the main thing to avoid, is processed meats. So, you know, things like your deli meats, the salamis and whatnot, often they are treated with nitrites. And that can also, or that when we eat them, can cause the production of nitrosamines, which have been shown to be carcinogenic. So we really want to be avoiding anything processed, you know, to avoid those nitrites. Then the other thing is, when we're buying meats, the source of the meat, you know, you want to make sure you're avoiding animals that are treated with antibiotics and with hormones. So, for example, you know, if you can, be going for organic free-range chicken, and again, eggs as well, anything that's come from the animal, and even yogurt, milk products, you want it to be, you know, organic, so it hasn't been treated with those chemicals. If we're looking at things like beef, you know, you want it to be grass-fed. So anything that comes from New Zealand and Australia, it's always grass-fed. So that's a good go-to. Buying stuff from New Zealand or Australia can be good, but otherwise just make sure it says on the label grass-fed, you know, free-range, grass-fed. And with fish, you know, ideally, and it's quite controversial, the whole going for for wild fish is going to be healthier, but then the controversial part of it is that we're kind of like depleting the oceans from fish. So I guess it's all about balance. The main thing is that if you are having farm fish, you want it to be organic. Like if you're going for non-organic salmon, even though it's so expensive, like it's crazy if it is organic, but non-organic salmon, those fish have been given dyes to make it look like it's pinker. So animals are sort of, they're given stuff so that they get bigger quicker, they can have these growth hormones in them, and it can really mess up our hormones as well. So that's another thing. The lady who sent in the question before about the sort of not being able to get rid of some weight around the waist. Sometimes this can be a set of hormonal imbalances, but looking at the hormones we're ingesting through our foods as well. So to be wary of that, making sure you're not ingesting any extra hormones and just clearing everything up, even down to the toxins that you have. Us ladies have a lot more exposure to toxins because of our perfumes, our makeup, the stuff we put in our hair, nail varnish, which I'm guilty of myself. So women have a lot higher incidence of things like autoimmune conditions, and it's likely because of all these extra toxins that we have. So looking at cleaning everything up, going for as natural makeup products as you can, and anything that you've got in the house. Yeah, so like coconut oil is a good moisturizer rather than the perfume stuff. If you're spraying perfume on you, put it on your clothes rather than your skin.
And you mentioned organic foods, so there's a specific question came in surrounding that. Which ones need to be organic? Because obviously organic is more expensive. So if you were kind of targeting buying some foods organic, what would you target? So
there's a really good list called there's the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and every year the environmental work, I know it's great names, the environmental working group go and test all these fruit and veg, and they see which ones had the most chemical residues and which ones had the least. And the ones in the Clean 15 pretty much don't really have many chemical residues. So those would be the things that I wouldn't be too worried about going organic. So things like avocados, onions, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kiwis, I think pineapples in there as well. That's okay for them not to be organic. Whereas the Dirty Dozen, they have a lot of chemical residues, and the top two have been the same top two, I think, for the last 4 years. That's spinach and strawberries. So I'm sure 23 different types of chemicals were found on one type of strawberry, and some of those chemicals have, been shown to be connected to hyperactivity in children and whatnot. So if you're buying spinach, if you're buying strawberries, ideally it's organic. And kale has been number 3 for the last couple of years. So just, ideally those sorts of things. Also, tomatoes, I think apples are in there, celery, so there are specific things that I always make sure I get organic, and then ones that I don't mind too much about. But if it comes down to, and I've had this question before, okay, so if they're in the Dirty Dozen, does it mean if they're not organic, I shouldn't eat that? If you've got an alternative, go for the alternative. But if it means I'm not going to have that vegetable, then no, have the vegetable still, because the fiber, the nutrients you're getting from it is going to be better rather than you going without having vegetables.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. There are lots more questions, but I know that you will make sure that they are answered afterwards, but we're a little bit over time. So thank you, as always, Victoria, for your session. Thank you to everyone for joining. We will be doing an email survey for feedback. Anything that you would like to see on the sessions, please let us know. At the same time as the feedback we'll be collecting, we will also be sharing a recording, so you can listen again. But that's us for this week. So I hope to see you all again, and stay safe.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.